The lights inside Roosevelt High School's small auditorium flickered against the varnished wooden floor. The smell of chalk dust, old curtains, and floor polish filled the air. It was 1963, in Gary, Indiana, a modest industrial town where the air carried the hum of factory life and the dreams of families who worked hard but hoped for something more. On that chilly evening, parents, teachers, and neighbors packed into the auditorium, whispering with anticipation as the school talent show was about to begin. Children shuffled nervously behind the curtain, clutching instruments, props, and dreams that barely reached beyond the city limits. But among them stood one tiny boy, barely 5 years old, too scared to lift his head. His name was Michael Jackson. He was the youngest of the Jackson brothers, and tonight, he was about to step into the light for the very first time. The stage looked enormous from where he stood. The red velvet curtain felt like a wall separating him from a world he wasn't ready to face. His small hands trembled as he held the microphone. The noise of the crowd faded into a low hum. His brothers, Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, and Marlon, were already in position, waiting for their cue. But Michael? He couldn't move. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story, the teacher backstage whispered. It's okay, Michael. Just breathe. But he couldn't. His throat locked. His legs froze. The spotlight hit him like a wave of heat, and the only thing louder than the murmuring crowd was the sound of his own heartbeat. No one could have known what was about to happen. No one could have imagined that this trembling, wide-eyed child would one day be called the king of pop. That moment, the curtain began to rise. The audience saw him, a little boy, standing perfectly still, eyes glued to the floor, too afraid to meet their gaze. Some smiled gently, others chuckled softly at the sight. There was sympathy in the room, but also something else, curiosity. Who was this child, and why did he seem so terrified? Then, the music began. The opening notes of "Climb Every Mountain" filled the air, echoing softly through the small speakers. Michael's brothers looked at him, waiting for him to sing his part. For a long second, maybe two, nothing happened, and then, he opened his mouth. What came out next would change everything. A voice, pure, rich, and impossibly powerful, rose from that tiny body. It didn't sound like a 5-year-old. It didn't sound like a child at all. It was as though the music of 1,000 emotions had found its home in a single, fragile vessel. The audience gasped, then came silence. No one moved. No one even breathed. The sound that filled the room wasn't just a song, it was a revelation. Michael Jackson sang with a depth that defied reason, a tone that felt ancient and new all at once. His pitch was perfect, his phrasing instinctive, his emotion unmistakable. The fear that had frozen him moments earlier seemed to melt away, replaced by something unexplainable, an energy, a connection, a spark. People would later say that it felt like time had stopped. That they were witnessing something holy, and in that instant, Michael Jackson himself changed. He felt it, the strange, electric current that only artists can describe. It wasn't just confidence. It was communion. The energy from the crowd surged toward him, and he sent it right back, magnified through his voice. Years later, he would recall that moment. That was when I first understood what it meant to connect through performance. I was so scared I could barely breathe, but then something happened. This energy came from the audience and went through me and back to them. I was 5 years old, but I knew right then that this was what I was born to do. After the final note faded, there was a pause, one beat of silence before the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Parents stood to their feet. Teachers clapped, tears in their eyes. The little boy who couldn't look up minutes ago was now the center of a standing ovation. Katherine Jackson, his mother, was sitting near the back. She would later recall how her heart stopped when Michael began to sing. She had always known her children had talent, but this was different. It was like watching God place his hand on my child, she said. Joe Jackson, Michael's father, was in the wings. He didn't smile much, but that night, he did. Not because his son was cute or brave, but because he saw something raw, something powerful, something that could go far beyond Gary, Indiana. That night didn't just reveal Michael Jackson's gift. It revealed a destiny. After the show, people gathered around the Jackson family, still buzzing with astonishment. Teachers patted Michael's head, other children stared at him wide-eyed. But Michael himself seemed quiet again, humble, even shy. He wasn't thinking about fame or applause. He was thinking about how it felt. The fear, the transformation, the love. It had awakened something inside him. From that night on, Michael Jackson wasn't the same. That he began practicing obsessively, every day, every night. His brothers would rehearse in the living room, and Michael would insist on joining, even when his father thought he was too young. But he wasn't just singing anymore. He was feeling that. He studied the way people reacted, the energy in their eyes, the rhythm of their claps, the silence between the notes. Even as a child, he understood something most adults never would, that music wasn't just sound, it was connection. By the time Michael turned 6, the Jackson brothers had become a neighborhood sensation. They played in small clubs, talent shows, and local events. Crowds would gather, whispering, "Wait till you hear the little one." And when Michael stepped up to the microphone, everything changed. The laughter stopped. The dancing began. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. His presence, his energy, his emotion, it was like a force of nature contained in a small boy's frame. In 1965, the Jackson 5 were born. Within a few short years, they would sign with Motown, release chart-topping hits like "I Want You Back," and capture the world's attention. But all of it, every tour, every award, every moonwalk, traced back to that one trembling moment on a dimly lit stage in Gary, Indiana. Let's pause for a second and imagine it, the world's most iconic performer, the man who would one day redefine music videos, revolutionize dance, and break racial barriers on global television. Once stood paralyzed by fear in front of a handful of neighbors and teachers. He was 5. He was terrified, and yet, he sang. That's the real magic of Michael Jackson, not the fame, not the money, but the courage. The willingness to open himself up completely, to let his voice carry his soul before he even knew what that meant. As the Jackson 5's fame exploded, Michael often looked back on that first performance. In interviews, he spoke of it not as a victory, but as a spiritual awakening. It wasn't about applause, he said. It was about connection. I felt something I couldn't explain. It was like the audience and I became one thing. That feeling never left him. Every concert, every performance, every moonwalk, Michael was chasing that same moment. The energy flowing from the crowd, through him, and back again. That was the essence of his art, and perhaps that's why his shows felt so alive. Because behind the perfection of the choreography and the spectacle of lights was still that same little boy from Gary, Indiana, still nervous, still reaching out, still trying to connect. What's fascinating is how that first moment shaped everything that followed. Psychologists have often analyzed Michael Jackson's personality, his perfectionism, his obsession with rehearsal, his sensitivity to criticism. Some say it all began with that early fear, that paralyzing stage fright that he conquered not through confidence, but through surrender. He didn't overcome fear by pushing it away. He transformed it, turning vulnerability into art. That's the genius of Michael Jackson. He once said, "I don't really think about being the best or the greatest. I just think about touching people's hearts." And that's exactly what began that night in 1963. In later years, when fame became unbearable, when the cameras followed him everywhere, and the world demanded more than he could give, Michael would sometimes retreat to moments of innocence. He would visit Gary again, quietly, anonymously. He would walk past Roosevelt High School, the place where it all began, and smile softly. It wasn't the size of the stage that mattered to him. It was the connection. The purity. The honesty of a frightened little boy discovering who he truly was. Imagine being in that audience in 1963. Would you have known? Would you have recognized that history was being made right before your eyes? Because that's the thing about beginnings, they often look ordinary until time reveals what they really were. That night in Gary wasn't just a school talent show. It was the birth of an era. Every note of Thriller, every spin in Billie Jean, every tear shed during Man in the Mirror, all of it began with one trembling breath from a 5-year-old boy who dared to sing. So, the next time you see old footage of Michael Jackson, remember this: before the fame, before the legend, before the moonwalk, there was fear, there was silence, and then, there was music. That first song didn't just reveal a voice. It revealed a purpose. A destiny, and maybe, that's why his music still feels alive today. Because it was born not from ambition, but from transformation, from a child facing his fear and discovering something divine within himself. Michael Jackson's story reminds us that greatness doesn't always arrive with confidence. Sometimes, it begins with trembling hands, tear-filled eyes, and a heart that beats too fast. It begins in the quiet corners of courage, the kind that whispers, "Do it anyway." And when we finally take that step, we discover what Michael did at age 5, that connection, the invisible thread between hearts, is the real magic of life. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of how courage begins, and subscribe for more untold stories from music history, because somewhere out there, another little boy or girl is standing behind the curtain, terrified, but ready to sing, and maybe, just maybe, history is about to change again.